Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I welcome Skylar Schock. Skylar is a Northern California native about to graduate with her MFA in performance from University of Las Vegas. You may have seen her perform her stand-up comedy at Jimmy Kimmel's Comedy Club, opening for Michael Yo and Matt Iseman. Her recent theater credits include her one-woman show, It's Not My Fault, I'm the Problem at Vegas Theater Company, Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Varya in The Cherry Orchard at the Nevada Conservatory Theatre. She was awarded Special Congressional Recognition for her stand-up comedy project, Laugh Until You Cry. She starred and produced the short film She Had It Coming, directed by Gedde Watanabe, which was a 25-time film festival selection. She has also received her BA in Communications from the University of California, San Diego, and La Jolla, California. In this episode, Skylar shares her journey of becoming a stand-up comedian and why she has found stand-up to be powerful when it pertains to mental health. Skylar and I talk about how sometimes the industry can be difficult on the performer's mental health and what are some things the professionals themselves do for their well-being. We touch on the value of laughter and how stand-up comedy can be therapeutic. I really hope you can get a lot out of this episode. You can find Skylar on Instagram at @sshocking, and I really hope you can leave a 5-star review, and I would truly appreciate it. All right, Skylar, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for your interest on coming on the podcast as well. I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have today. I like comedy very much, and really looking forward to getting your insights into it and your experience. But before we go down that road, I do want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and share with the listeners what it is that you do and where you're based, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Awesome. Thanks. And thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here as well. My name is Skylar Schock. I'm a stand-up comic and actress and film producer based out of currently Las Vegas. I'm originally from Northern California. I've lived in San Diego and LA. So I kind of consider myself California native, but in Vegas at the moment. And I'm super excited about our conversation today. Mental health is really important to me. And I know we've kind of got excited to connect about where the intersection of mental health and comedy is and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just out of curiosity, what got you into comedy to begin with? And, where did that interest come from?
It's such a funny question because I think, I never was the class clown or like somebody that kind of was the person that was known for being like, oh, she's super funny. Or I never thought that that was something, I was kind of known for, was a part of my identity per se. But as I started evolving in terms of my acting career, I would get put into comedy scenes, and I just had this kind of innate ability to find the comedy in things or to play a scene with the comedy. And what I realized was tragedy and being really honest is what makes something funny. It's just the circumstances. We often laugh at things that are really real or
Yeah.
painful because we understand and we relate to it. So in a
Mhm.
way, my kind of vulnerability has made me more drawn to comedy because I've realized as I've evolved in my career. So eventually I started doing stand-up comedy as a part of my performance MFA, getting
Yeah.
my master's degree. We had to take a class in it. And so for me, as I'm starting to learn about how to write jokes, I'm realizing, right, the stuff that I find funny is generally stuff that other people kind of have said or are experiencing, and then they find it funny. And I just have always been, a big proponent of being vulnerable and just sort of living your truth. And so it just turned out to be that was kind of what makes me funny. And then after I started doing stand up, a lot of my friends were like, of course, you're hilarious. And I was like, I don't know, am I? But
Yeah.
so it really truly came honestly by it. I never had these intentions of saying, I really want to make a room of people laugh, but it ended up being that like my honest approach to wanting to connect and tell stories happened to lend itself to being, to being funny or to having comedy be the way to do that.
Right. And it's so important that you talk about telling stories, because that's the one thing that really fascinates me about stand-up comedy. And until recently I didn't really put the two together. But a lot of the things I've been focusing on over the last year personally, for personal reasons too, but the whole idea of storytelling, because I've really started reading about history and learning about the past and, some of the things that happened in the past. But there's that whole notion of storytelling. And I think stand up comedians need to be really good at that, to be able to tell a story and then deliver that punchline. But so that's one thing. But the other piece is the whole pressure of telling that story and delivering that punchline. And that's what really fascinates me about stand up comedians and the ability for them to do that. How are you able to do that, and what are your nerves like in the moment, and if the punchline doesn't land, how are you able to pivot and take it in a different direction?
Well, the nice thing about stand up is that usually if something doesn't get a laugh, calling that out will get you one. So
Yeah.
generally that's always like kind of the backup plan, right?
Yeah.
Is that you can always kind of just be like, oh, I guess that's just me. Or you can, kind of make some kind of comment and then that will generally get a laugh and allow you kind of back into your flow. And it does happen where you'll really think something's funny or think it's really clever and it's like, radio silent. And oftentimes, I mean, the more I do comedy, the more I've realized that it's usually the stuff you were kind of pushing for that isn't funny, but really when you just are, like I make a joke about, I said something like, I'm busy on my phone, scrolling the profiles of the girls my boyfriend follows on Instagram. And I had never said that out loud before or said like, hey, do you guys do this? Do you look at the profiles of the girls your boyfriend follows on Instagram? Like I never, kind of tested it, but I just knew I was like, this is so specifically vulnerable to admit that. And it's like, it has gotten a laugh pretty much every time. And I
Yeah.
think it's just because it's not necessarily right, like a healthy or good thing to do, but it's certainly kind of like by admitting it, you just sort of know that there's an air of some like, but if I tried to make that funny and said
Right.
something like I wrote a joke, sometimes, the audience can always just tell when you're being authentic or when you're writing because you think that that's sort of supposed to be funny.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. So like the forced versus the natural aspect of it. And to your point, that vulnerability is so important, because that kind of ties back to mental health, right?
Totally.
And I'm one of the things I'm seeing, or trends for that matter, even amongst stand-up comedians, they're really talking more about their mental health in a very lighthearted way. I mean, to your point earlier, it is dark humor, but at least they're being vulnerable and they're making it almost normal to talk about these things, and they're getting rid of that stigma around mental health. So why do you see that overlap with comedy and mental health, and how has it helped you along your journey?
Yeah, I love, and this is my favorite question, right? So I love this for several reasons. I did, and I'm sure we'll get into Laugh Until You Cry later, which is the event that I produce around this. But I talked to a mental health expert as we were developing that program, and she said the most profound thing to me on accident, right? Where she had said, well, yeah, I mean, laughter is a lot like what people are seeking from therapy. They're seeking an altered state from where they are. You're
Mhm.
essentially seeking to change your experience of the moment, and laughter does that. So that's the same reason people seek out comedy, right? Is
Mhm.
you're essentially seeking out something to make you laugh, to change your, to take you out of whatever the kind of state of being is and alter it. And that's, I thought that was really fascinating in terms of that intersection and why I think that's becoming more popular, that comics are talking about mental health. In a way, it's almost like the last, it's a tabooed subject in that before it would be, sex was a really popular is a
Hmm.
popular topic for comics. And anything that is embarrassing or is not talked about as publicly and yet is a shared experience becomes something that I think is ripe for comedy because of that, because people aren't talking about it. And then you share this thing or you make light of it and other people are like, oh my God, I'm not the only, they can connect to that. And so I think that's why there's a trend in it right now with comics
Hmm.
and mental health. For me, it's very much that exact same intersection is I found that, even in my family, despite the very real need for basically all of us to be in therapy, no, there was still a stigma around it. And there's still a
Hmm.
stigma around talking about going to therapy. And so being able to talk about it in comedy and by making people laugh, you're essentially disarming them a little bit and allowing them to be open to hearing what you have to say and not feeling like they have some responsibility of fixing it, but they can just be with you and laugh about it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And do you see like any risk with taking it too far where it becomes like almost a joke and it's not a serious topic? Or do you think it's just helping people get comfortable talking about it and getting rid of that taboo around it or stigma around it?
I mean, I think the danger probably is as it is with almost any thing is that if you're speaking to an experience that is not yours or you're speaking on behalf of other people without the right background or authority on it, even in a joke, like you probably are possibly going too far. But if it's your own experience,
Hmm.
then I think you're usually within a safe or a safer zone, right? Um, because everyone's experience is going to be different, and so whatever experience I have with friends or family members and suicide is going to be different than someone else's experience with that. And so as long as I'm trying to be honest about the comedy within my experience versus like, here's a hypothetical where, or commenting on somebody else's experience without uh, empathy, I think is when you can possibly get into a bit of a danger zone. But I think that's true with a lot of things. And when people talk about race relations or they talk about,
Hmm.
they talk about just income inequality or women in the workplace, like unless you're speaking from your own experience, you're always at risk of potentially, saying something that is harmful.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And empathy is an important thing for sure. So thanks for highlighting that. I think having that empathy for others' experiences then kind of keeps you grounded and you're not really taking away from anyone else's experience. So that's important. But yeah, you touched on that comedy show you put on. Like share a little bit more about what it's all about and how has it been beneficial from a mental health perspective?
Yeah. So I will, and I'll tell the story of how it came to be, how
Yeah.
I started it. So essentially, right after I'd started doing stand up comedy, I was home for the holidays with my family, and one of my family members was just acting very differently than I, had normally experienced them. And they were having really intensive mood swings and anger that had really seemed to be harbored at me. And it was just really difficult for me because it was like, it felt very erratic and unpredictable. And I had no idea what to do other than say, like, I guess I have to sort of set some boundaries for myself around our
Mhm.
relationship right, and it was really quite stressful, and that family member and I had to do, like, a road trip together, and, one of my other family members commented on the way I looked when I got out of the car. They're like, "You looked," they made the joke, that "You looked like you just got back from war," and I was like, "Well, I
Right.
felt like I did emotionally," you know? So
Yeah.
we were joking about it right in the moment, and then I came home and I wrote a joke and performed it in stand-up comedy where I had doing, a set where I had said something along the lines of having a relationship with a family member as an adult is a lot like being in a relationship you wish you would have ended years before. You totally can't get along, but you have too many inside jokes to call it quits. My family member and I see the world completely differently.
Yeah.
I think they're mentally unstable. They think I spend too much money.
Right.
And I was just making light of this intense situation. And approximately 3 weeks after that, this family member actually required hospitalization for a mental breakdown. And it was only after we started trying to process it and as a family come together and figure out like, well, what happened, or what how do we help now? What do we need to do? We were aware of how few resources were made available, and how little we all knew about what to do in this situation.
Yeah.
And then B, we realized that that comedy was sort of this thing that kind of brought us hope through it all. And so for
Mhm.
me, I thought, okay, well, how can I kind of tie those together? And so I wanted to create an event called Laugh Until You Cry, which does that, which is essentially just comics telling jokes and doing their set, and then staying for a talk back with the mental health expert where we share resources, share stories, share experiences, and we invite the audience to participate in that conversation, all with the goal of truly just raising awareness, destigmatizing the conversation, and that has been really the most rewarding part of the shows that we've done. Is afterwards when we put up a QR code for people to scan for resources in their area that people do or that they're sharing. And that we found that just that ability to make it less of feeling less like an intervention or like some kind of like, hey, we need to talk about mental health, and more of
Right.
a, hey, this is something and we can all laugh about it. And then can we also at the same time like learn and discuss in a non-threatening environment and allow people that kind of opportunity.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's amazing. And do you know if there's other types of shows like that happening, or kind of what you're doing or the people you're working with is somewhat unique? Because it sounds very unique to me. I haven't heard of anything like this anywhere else.
I mean, I don't want to be so egotistical to assume I'm the only person doing something like this, but I haven't found anything quite like this before, or yet. And I'm super eager to keep. My goal with the events is to produce them all over the country and basically bring the free, a free show to cities all over, and just keep the conversation going, and maybe do a podcast kind of with comics. But I don't. I've seen versions where some comics, like we talked about earlier, some comics are just talking about mental health in their set, which is
Yeah.
one thing. Some shows are in support of a nonprofit or organization to raise awareness, which is sort of its own thing. And we kind of wanted to blend it. And for me, the first one we did, I kind of had the idea coming out of this pandemic of, well, how can we create an experience that's different than me watching something on Netflix, or me going and having watching something on my computer, or talking and connecting separately, but like, how can we create a community in
Right.
person where people are feeding off of each other's laughter and connecting? And there's something really powerful usually when we do the show, I ask the question, I tell the story, which I just told, and I say, does anyone here have a friend, family member, or loved one who has had a similar experience? And just
Hmm.
about everyone raises their hand. And for me, that moment when you can look around the room and be in a room with people, seeing that other people are reflecting back a part of your experience, that was what was really important to me that we capture. And I think that's what makes it unique, is that it's more than just, here is where we're going to talk about mental health and you're going to nod your head and then you're going to walk away. Or here's our one-on-one therapy session where we agree how important mental health is, but to
Right.
kind of try to bring it together where people can connect and be truly creating a community in the room of a safe space.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure. And you mentioned the story with your family member, and obviously you were trying to keep it lighthearted. And after the fact, you found out that it was a lot more serious than you'd originally anticipated. How was that? And the reason why I'm asking that question is often, like jokes are meant with no intent or ill intent or harm. And you quite often see a lot of comedians get themselves in hot water if they offend someone or a group of people. So how do you respond to that, knowing that you didn't have those intentions, and how do you feel like as a comedian, knowing that perhaps you were joking about something, but it wasn't
Yeah, well, that's
received as a joke? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was a really eye-opening experience for me for that exact reason. And
Mhm.
I've, I have another joke where I say the word crazy, and I hadn't even thought twice about it because of the context of my joke. It's talking about labels.
Right.
And another at a show, a mental health expert called me out on stage in front of everyone and was like, "See, you did it. You're the problem. You said crazy." And I had to receive it in the moment and just say like, wow, that is true. And it is, you're right, where there was never an uh ill intention or malicious intent with the me
Right.
saying the word crazy. I obviously, the more I'm learning, the more I know that that's why that's so problematic.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like, I guess that's sort of the part of this that I feel like, I guess that's why I'm doing stand up, is that I'm okay being corrected and wanting to learn and wanting to
Mhm.
grow. And if I can do it in front of an audience of people and I learned the lesson that they saw me have to learn it and they could witness it. And if one person in that audience now thinks twice about using the word crazy, like, then I'm happy about it. So I guess that's sort of the weird place of being like, as long as I can genuinely feel like I'm trying and I'm earnest about that, and I'm not, I mean, and there's conversations, like there's gray areas of like, well, can you use that label in this
Mhm.
joke, and is it appropriate? And all I can do is like, be willing to correct myself or grow or learn along the way. But it is scary. Especially the way people can get really quickly villainized for
Right.
something online, and someone's absolutely liable to take a photo or video of me saying it and post it, and who knows what context they put that in. And so there is a big degree of being scared of something like that happening. And I do, sometimes I'll ask people like, is this joke mean? Does this feel like harmful if I'm not
Mhm.
sure? But it's tricky. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? When you were saying that, what jumped out for me, and I covered this in another episode, was the whole notion of critical thinking and how that's almost going away from society because we're so scared of saying things or being villainized, as you mentioned, for saying the wrong thing, that we're not actually exploring our thoughts and putting ourselves out there to be challenged and perhaps even learning. And I think for comedians, that's a huge risk. And they're often doing it a lot because they're testing out a joke to see how it
Right.
lands. And that's an aspect of critical thinking, too, where maybe you use that response as feedback, which obviously comedians do, to tweak. And a lot of the times it's based on laughter, but it could also be on offending someone. And yeah, so I struggle with that because I feel like that takes away from us as a society to be able to learn and have conversation. What are your thoughts around that?
Oh, I love that. I so am with you where it's such a tricky balance of, I think there has to be accountability, but when there's too much accountability that it creates like fear, then you're right. It essentially paralyze. And the problem is, it's not that people stop thinking, they just stop thinking it out loud or getting that critical response feedback loop you're talking about. Where, if I'm afraid to say something in a group of friends, I might still think it. And then I'll just go on my little echo chamber to find the people who agree with me, where I can sort of somehow, reinstill something versus wanting to explore it out loud and get feedback and not be judged for maybe having an opinion that I'm fleshing out. Like to your point, where it's like, how do we kind of allow ourselves a discourse? One of my best friends, who's I'm related to, she's my cousin. We have really intense conversations where we kind of disagree on something, and it can get really heated, and
Right.
and we've had to like learn how to essentially be able to give each other feedback, but also meet each other where we're at. But I also, and sometimes just accept that we're maybe going to feel differently about something. But it is in those conversations, I think we both are able to grow or understand our own belief system or not better. Like we're able to challenge. And it's like, I feel so bad about the fact that that a lot of people aren't able to do that, or that we can't have healthy conversations like that Because I think it's absolutely where we become better advocates of our own critical thinking skills. Because if you're not testing it out, you're just reaffirming it. You're not actually thinking it out, which I just think is what you said, which I think is so true.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I think it's important to have those relationships where you can trust the other person, that, you could share something and it doesn't become a huge ordeal. It's just testing ideas out, opinions out, and learning with each other, right? And I think that's the biggest thing I worry about with that fear is you're not learning anymore, right? Because I may share something with you that you may not have considered or not entertained ever in the past, but together, through having that conversation, we can learn something together, and that's really important. The other piece you mentioned was, you're obviously putting yourself out there where you could easily be attacked, or your picture could be posted online, or trolls can come after you.
Right.
How do you protect yourself against that? And this comes back to mental health, right? Because I mean, it takes a lot of strength and courage to be able to deal with that. Occasionally I get comments online and I'm like, why is this person saying this to me?
Yeah.
But I can't imagine being on a stage and being heckled, or even someone coming after you online saying, oh, I went to her show, blah, 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 blah. Like, how do you maintain your sanity and keep your mental health in check with these types of situations?
Well, it's such a good question. And I think, uh, I guess I'm lucky in that my experience as an actor sort of started me on this journey of that probably right around the time the internet really was becoming a comment zone. Cause I remember I had done a web series with my friends when I was like 20 something, like baby. I was a baby. And I was just, I had no idea about comments. Like, and so this web series is out there, and I remembered, like, we were so excited because it was getting a lot of views, and I was at a baseball game in San Francisco at a Giants game, and like 3 days later, someone commented, I saw the character name at a Giants game, and she was a bitch, and I was just like, it was my first time hearing something that was like, first of all, no one came up to me. Like, no one came
Yeah,
and talked to me and said anything. They just looked at me and made an opinion about me
right,
from 20 feet away. And, um, and so I basically in that moment had to sort of just like learn how to let that go. But what I've done over, and sometimes it's easier and than others to let things
right.
go, depending on how distant you are from the comment, and
Yeah,
how much you believe already what the comments said, because obviously if it's something that preys on an insecurity you have, you're going to be way more likely to believe them
yeah,
versus if it's just like something ridiculous. But I also allowed myself kind of to say like, well, you have to just take praise and criticism and like give them the same weight. So like
mhm,
I'm so grateful when people want to come up and tell me how much they enjoyed it or if they really resonated. But for me, the stuff that I feel most passionately about is when people can bring it back to them, like how it helped them or impacted them. Cause I can take
right,
that as its own thing. And ultimately, I have to kind of take them both with a grain of salt. But I
mhm,
also think, to sort of the long-winded answer to your question about how I do this, sometimes more or less successfully, is to just remind myself, like, the people whose opinions matter to me are the people who have proven that and are my friends and are my family, and that I allow them to be the ones that I kind of are the only ones that I will take the affirmations from or the comment, the criticism from. And
right,
until you're someone that I've put in that group, whether you're a peer that I respect or you're a mentor or you're a friend or family member, until you're someone that I've really sort of said, I want to receive your criticism, then it's not, it can't mean anything to me. And that's,
right.
it's hard to do that because people are going to say stuff about you. And it is sometimes painful and vulnerable to read and like, and sometimes it's even people who you do know, like, or people who are not that far away from you,
Right.
making comments and criticisms. But I just ultimately have to kind of, for my own mental health, have the boundary of like, well, whose criticisms or praise will I be kind of choosing to calibrate and trying to come up with a process for not, not receiving the other stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's an important point because I've really started looking at it that way too. It's where is that feedback or criticism coming from, right? Like, is this person really earned the right to criticize me? And one of the things I've done is I've put the Teddy Roosevelt speech,
I was just going to mention it.
Man in the Arena, on my phone. So anytime I get criticized, whether it's in person or online, I'll just pull up that speech and read it. And it's such a good reminder for me that I'm putting myself out there in the
Yes.
arena, whereas this person's just sitting in the cheap seats. I don't really care what they have to say, right? And honestly, what I've found is most people who have also put themselves out there, they know what it takes. So they come from a completely different place
Totally.
when they're offering criticism or feedback. There's grace there, there's compassion there, there's humility there. And that is the type of feedback I know that helps me, and I'm all for it. But it's the other stuff that is not helpful. And as easy as it sounds, to your point, it is hard to hear, but the more you kind of work through it, it's easier to let it bounce off of you.
I was so glad you said that quote, because right before you said it, I was going to mention it, where so that quote really, I think, is just like, that becomes the stepping stone to walk away from feeling, because I feel the exact same way. Anytime am, start to sense myself having a reaction to someone else's feedback or comment they've made about me, I just remind myself, like, it's not the critic who counts. Like,
Yeah.
it's the man in the arena. And it's really is that quote that allows me to take a step and do what you said, which is say, like, okay, well, this person, they haven't done what I'm doing. Their feedback isn't, it's not, it doesn't really matter to me the way that it would if it was someone else. And the people who I do want it from are generally much better at having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
And I also realized this is similar to what we were talking about, but it's a little bit different, where I remember once at a pretty young age, someone I think had made a comment about another woman. And I'm very sensitive to when women comment on other women's physical
Mhm.
appearance. I just really don't like it, no matter what kind of, unless you're giving a compliment. But when you critique another woman, and I just realized that it was like, uh, that comment is more to make you feel better than, and if you have to, like, tear someone down to make yourself feel better, I feel bad for you. Like,
Yeah.
because I can understand what kind of painful place you must be living in for that's the way you feel better about yourself. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's that I remind myself of, like, the kind of person who is gonna criticize or attack you without knowing you or without the experience of what you're doing. It's like, man, that's got to be a really tough place to be in. That's the thing that makes someone feel good about themselves. And I just have a lot of empathy for that, because
Right.
that's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's truth to the whole concept of hurt people, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, same thing. I try to remind myself. Sometimes I forget, and then I get worked up. But it's a good
Yes. Yes.
reminder. I agree with you, and yeah, I mean, yeah, anyone who's trying to tear someone else down, I don't know if they're even feeling better, right? That's something I always think. I'm like, are they actually feeling better? They're probably just trying to pull other people down with them. And, misery loves company. So, yeah, it's just
Totally.
not a good place to be, and not to be around people like that. That's what's helped me. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, that's great. And anything else you want to share as far as your experience with mental health or your journey as a comedian? What's helped you, or what people can take from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll share a few of the things that have come up from some of the talkbacks that I
Yeah.
personally have just been totally, I've just found to be these little nuggets that I've found really helpful, and then I can talk more about myself. But I think the big thing I realized when I first started the Laugh Until You Cry talkbacks, we were having these conversations with a mental health expert, and she said a few things that I think were so key to the mission of what I want to do, which is just changing the rhetoric and destigmatizing the conversation. And the first thing Dr. Michelle Paul, who is the expert we worked with. She is she heads the psychology department at UNLV, and she's she runs the clinic there. So she's an amazing woman. And she had said a few things like, the first thing is, the way we talk about mental health
Hmm.
is not the way we talk about physical health, and that's a problem. Like when you say, I have cancer, I have a broken leg, you don't say I am cancer or I am broken leg, but you say I'm depressed or I'm schizophrenic or I'm bipolar. And so just that alone, if you can change it to say like I have bipolar disorder, I have, you're able to separate a bit the mental health issue. I have anxiety, not I'm an anxious person. And if you're able to
Right.
separate it, you can start to treat it in a way in which allows you to not feel like it's your identity, which I thought was really powerful.
Right.
Um, and just a simple thing too, or talking about someone else. It's like, oh, she's depressed. It's like, oh, she has depression or she's dealing with depression. And it
Yeah.
allows you to help in the way that we just talk about it.
Yeah.
And then she said the same thing about suicide, which has stuck with me ever since, was that she said, it's really harmful to say someone committed suicide because,
Mm.
when you say someone's committed something, what do you usually think of? It's like you think of someone who's committed crimes or committing it as a negative act versus saying someone who died by suicide, and now it becomes a situation that we have to deal with. Like we can't have thousands of people dying by suicide. Like that becomes
Mhm.
something we have to do something about. But when we say they committed suicide, it's almost like we're, washing our hands of needing to solve it or treat it. So for me, those were just like two really simple things that have totally radically changed just my day-to-day way that I think about mental health. So when someone's struggling with something, that you can remember, it's like, this isn't this person's identity. This is something they
Right.
need help with, or I need help with. Like I do have anxious thoughts, and I personally, Skylar, have anxiety, and that's something that I have developed or am working on developing tools to
Mhm.
address, but it helps to separate it from myself a bit. And I think um, so that for me was like huge, just like, and it's simple because it's something that you could do without, you could just be an ally of people helping themselves with mental health or other people, and you can talk about it differently.
Right. Yeah. And thank you for sharing all that. You're correct. I think that whole identity piece is so difficult because once you've identified with something, it's just you carry that label around, as you alluded to earlier when we were talking about labels as well. And that's so hard. And I think that's thinking about it too, because I've thought about it a lot in terms of how can we help people come forward and ask for help. And I think that's probably the fear too, is if I come out and say I'm depressed, that means that's how everyone's going to look at me, as this depressed person. So there's that fear of sharing that because of the label, as opposed to what you said, if you're able to say, this is something I struggle with under these situations, it's situational based, then it's a lot easier to tackle and talk about because it's not your identity. It's just
Yeah,
a part of you that you're wanting to either work through or get help with, right? So thank you for
absolutely.
sharing that. Yeah. Yeah. No, Skylar, I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story and everything you've been doing. That's amazing. It sounds like great work. And for listeners that do want to get a hold of you or find you online, what are some ways they can do that?
Yeah, well, as long as they're not leaving nasty comments. I'm just kidding. I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram and Twitter as Shocking, SSCHOCKING. And I always love hearing emails. I'm Skylar at messybunproductions.com. If anyone wants to send over an email or has ideas, or if you know someone who has a venue and would be interested in hosting a Laugh Until You Cry event in your city, we want to hear from you, and we want to bring it all over. So we're really passionate about that. So anybody who wants a stand-up comedy event with mental health talk back, let me know, because we're looking for more places this year to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll put that all in the show notes. I have certain people that are putting on, or at least I know people here in Calgary that are putting on mental health events. So I'll share that with them if you guys are willing to come up north.
We are, absolutely. We're definitely ready. Yeah. So
Awesome.
that'll be great. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time and having this conversation with me today.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate you having me on. And this is like the best of all worlds, just getting to have a soul nourishing conversation and talk about something that's so important. So thank you for making space for this and shedding light on all of this, because I think it's just the most valuable resource people have.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Thank
Thank you for checking out this episode with Skylar. As always, please leave a review or a comment in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. And if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify to get access to all the episodes. Thank you, and until next week.